Hey, g'day. I'd like to talk a little bit about our planetary consciousness. Okay, our planetary consciousness. Consciousness, in essence, and in geometric form, is formed by motive, which is represented by a pentagon trait, design of thought, pentagonal design of thought, a pentagon, 5-pointed design, 5 sides, 5 equal angles. Motive, personal thought or consciousness. So that's what forms consciousness. Personal thought. Without personal thought, we're not conscious. Without any personal input, without any personal thought, we're unconscious. However, our planetary consciousness is dominated by will. That's the dominant factor within our planet, our dream state, our mind state, dominated by will, which, as we spoke before, is an expression of desire. A pure expression of desire, very strong, pure expression of desire. Okay, motive-based, focused, creative thought, a personal sense. That's what desire is. Desire is a wish, and it's a personal sense. It's a conscious visualization. Desire is a conscious visualization, a personal visualization, a wish for something. A wish for something. I want this, I want that, wish I had this, wish I was like this, wish the world was like that. Dominated by a pure expression of desire, which is will. Okay. Therefore, the foundations of our entire social construct is will-based. Free will, all that sort of stuff. Faith is a product of will. All dominated by will. Instinct and intuition are will-based as well. They are forms of or derivations derived from will. Intuition, instinct. Instinct is personalized common memory, guidance of personalized common memory, personalized guidance of memory. Intuition is personalized guidance of feeling. It's emotional guidance. Emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, emotional belief. But they're all will-based, derived from the icosahedron of will. If you truncate the icosahedron of will, it creates those structures. Okay, so all those structures, the dominant factor is desire. I want this. I want that. That is the dominant factor of our entire social structure. Trying to fulfill our wishes, fulfill our personal agendas. It's a mess because of that. It's an absolute mess. Because, like I said, if you have desire as your main foundation, fulfilling your wishes, fulfilling your personal agendas, 8 billion of us trying to fulfill our personal agendas through the forum complex, where everybody is voicing their opinions, how they feel, their wishes, their desires. It's fed back to the source, the virtual brain mind. Then from that assessment, an adjustment stage is determined on what to change within the dream state, or what to add to the dream state, what to terminate from the dream state. As I said before, life as we know it is just visualized thoughts, our visualized thoughts. One mind, infinite number of personalities, all visualizing their thoughts into a shared dream. Because personalities aren't separate from the mind. They are aspects of a mind, identified attitudinal behaviours of the same mind. We're all sharing one mind, as I said before, wanting privacy. Therefore, because our innate ability is to visualize our thoughts into a dream state, that's just what we are, an essence that thinks and visualizes its thoughts into a dream. The mind dreaming. This is it. We've embedded ourselves into our own dream, but it is dominated by desire. Personal agendas. A visualization of personal agendas. That's what desire is. Visualization, focused creative thought or focused imagination, motive-based, focused imagination. Personal visualization. Visualization of our personal agendas. All of us trying to bring our wishes and our goals into fruition. But it's not regulated in any good sense. The regulation is will. The strong will become dominant. The weak wills become the slaves, the followers. It's crazy. Now we can still have will. We can still have will and expression of desire. But there are different ways to do that. And we've tried them before. As I said, everything within the dream represents or symbolises an aspect or a state of mind. A dream state is symbolic of a state of mind. This dream state is symbolic of a state of mind. Desire. Expressions of desire. The will. Strong will, weak will. Craziness. And Christ will. Now Christ will, products of will. Faith is a product of will. Free will, obviously, is a product of will. And as we said, all of those other structures are derived from that icosahedron of will. Even most viruses are derived from the icosahedron of will. They're will-based. Reprogramming. Will-based reprogramming. Okay. Now, Christ will. Christ will is still a product of icosahedrons of will. But, as faith, the edges of the icosahedrons, when these icosahedrons form, they overlap, those edges overlap at 90-degree angles. An edge of one icosahedron and an edge of another icosahedron at 90 degrees forms the diagonals of a square. They're intellectual will agreements. Intellectual will agreements. That's what produces faith. Receptive and constructive takes on board and builds one concepts. It's all dominated by will. What we take on board and build upon is all dominated by will. It's all regulated by will. Christ will, as faith was as free will was a product of 5 icosahedrons, all revolving around one vortex center, creating the 60 points of that structure, external points of a geometric structure. Faith had 6 icosahedrons, all revolving around one vortex center to form 72 points, external points of a geometric structure. But Christ will has 10 icosahedrons. Now, they also form intellect intellectual will agreements by overlapping their edges at 90 degrees to form diagonals of squares, but they also have, as I said before, the icosahedron has 20 equilateral triangle external facets and 12 points. Each of those points is the apex of a pentagon-based pyramid. 12 pentagon-based pyramids forming an icosahedron of will. Okay, like I said, we have intellectual will agreements, but we also have those equilateral triangle facets overlapping, forming interactive or experiential creative thought, experiential imagination, experience-based imagination, love-based. Forms hexagons, or hexagrams, sorry. So the equilateral triangles, when they all form together, the 10 icosahedrons, they form hexagrams. Hexagrams. Experience-based creative thought, experience-based imagination, which is love. Love is a product of experience-based creative thought, experience-based imagination. Unconditional acceptance forms reflex responses, programs, impulses. So it's programmed will. Forms hexagrams, but the external is a hexagon. Okay. Programmed imagination, programmed will. Love-regulated will. Love-regulated will. The other ones were intellect-regulated will, but will was dominant. So really it was will-regulated intellect. But in Christ's will, it is love-regulated will and intellect-regulated will, nature-regulated will. It actually is a product of Christ nature. Instead of all of those other structures in the will-based system being derived from the icosahedron of will, these structures are derived from Christ nature. Christ nature, which is 5 octahedrons of attitudinal behavior or nature. And an octahedron has 8 equilateral triangle facets and 6 points. Each of those points is the apex of a square-based pyramid of attitude, the position a body takes in relation to an environment. Attitude is adaptive. Attitudinal expression of feeling is nature, adaptive. Okay. So those 10, if you take one of those octahedrons, 2 icosahedrons form within the octahedron structure. On each edge of the octahedron has 12 edges. On each edge, it has the points of 2 icosahedrons. 2 icosahedron points. If you had 1 point on each of those edges, it'd give the 12 points of 1 icosahedron. But each octahedron has twinned icosahedrons. But when it also forms love-regulated will. Intellect-regulated will and love-regulated will. Christ will. Now, the term Christ. I know a lot of us think about Christianity, religion, Jesus, all that sort of stuff. But it's not just to do with Jesus or Christianity. Christ is a state of mind. As an acronym, CHRIST, cryptic host, renouncing indiscriminate sadistic traits. Cryptic host, renouncing indiscriminate sadistic traits. Sadistic traits. Getting pleasure from causing harm to others. Renouncing that. So we no longer get pleasure from causing harm, wanting to hurt each other. Cryptic host, renouncing indiscriminate sadistic traits. It is a state of mind. In simplicity, it's a state of mind that wishes no harm to any being and seeks not to take advantage of their vulnerable circumstances or conditions. That's what it is. Christ, cryptic host, renouncing indiscriminate sadistic traits. State of mind that wishes no harm to any being and seeks not to take advantage of their vulnerable circumstances or conditions. We're opportunists by nature, actually. We've excelled at taking advantage of other people's vulnerabilities. But Christ consciousness is an attempt to eliminate that, to renounce that, to renounce violence. There have been a lot of personalities within the mind, within the shared dream of mind, who have tried to bring about Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness into this dream state. Hasn't gone too well. Hasn't gone too well. Not just Jesus and Christianity, because that's just one person that tried to bring it, one personality, one personal reality that tried to bring in that state of mind to renounce violence. We can see there's a lot of groups around on this planet that have formed. The foundations of those groups are to renounce violence. Pacifists, all that sort of stuff, to renounce violence. They don't survive well in a violent world dominated by will. It's not easy. They become the minority because this planetary consciousness is dominated by desire, by personal agendas, expressing our personal agendas, visualizing our personal agendas into the dream state. So Christ's will, like I said, hasn't gone well. Buddha would have been someone else who was trying to bring in that state of mind. And a lot of other people throughout history, some known and some not, trying to bring about Christ consciousness within this reality to get rid of the violence, the opportunism, competitive ignorance, hierarchical privilege and dominance, all of that crap. It's been attempted many times, didn't work. Just didn't work. It was just a failure. And it was a failure because will is still very powerful. Even though that was regulated by nature, it's still very powerful. And it can become dominant again. As in viruses, will-based icosahedral viruses, very stubborn, very determined to do what they're meant to do, to reprogram. Through the forum complex, where everyone voices their opinions, those opinions are fed back to the source, a feedback process, and that determines how the dream state unfolds, evolves, changes. Christ consciousness didn't work. It's failed so many times. Obviously there are still followers, Buddhists. They created religions. Religion, it's just a failure as well. Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, all the major ones, and then thousands of other minor ones. They're all products of will, expressions of desire. Now, a lot of them do try to teach non-violence. Not all of them, and not all the time. Just when they feel like it, when it pleases them. Because Christianity's gone to war many times. Islam, all those other religions, gone to war many times. Buddhists, not as much. Maybe back in the past. But the rest have. Still are war-based, trying to express their desires, their will, force their will upon non-believers. You're a non-believer. We're going to torture the shit out of you until you become a believer. They've all done it. So Christ consciousness in that state did not work. Just didn't work. Failed. Many attempts. Many people coming into this reality trying to bring about that change of non-violence. But non-violence in a practical form. Not all run around like hippies, smoking dope, getting off their faces. I mean, living a normal way of life, but a caring and sharing normal way of life. Very practical way of life, not airy-fairy. Very practical way of life, but a sharing and caring way of living. But I said all those other ones failed. They're just a failure. Didn't work. And we probably have tried a lot of other things. The one I'm going to state now, I don't know whether we have tried in the past or whether this is the one that we're attempting to bring into being, into this reality. Now, we can still have personality, in essence, is identified attitudinal behaviour. It's a product of octahedrons, 5 octahedrons sharing the same base, so 5 squares, but then like a double terminating pyramid, you have an apex at the top, apex at the bottom, have an emotional plane, an icosagon plane, 20 points, 5 squares of intellect, the bases of those pentagon square-based pyramids, directed outwardly at the top and at the bottom to form octahedrons of nature or attitudinal behaviour, attitudinal expressions of feeling. Now that's personality. But in the will-based system, personality is formed by intuition and faith. A combination of intuition and faith forms personality in the will-based system, in the will-dominated planetary consciousness. But we can create personality in another state of mind. It's a product of self-awareness. It becomes a product of self-awareness. A cube octahedron represents, in geometric form, in geometrical thought harmonics, in geometry itself. People have called geometry sacred geometry because they realised that everything was formed by geometric structures. Therefore, their God must have created everything by using that language, the language of thought. They called it sacred geometry. It's just geometry. It's got nothing to do with gods or devils or any of that crap. Okay, so we can create structures, products of cube octahedrons. A cube, as I said before, has 6 square external facets. It's a prism. Cube. All square facets. 6 of them. The octahedron has 8 equilateral triangle facets. All equilateral triangle facets external. So a cube octahedron has both. It has 8 equilateral triangle facets and 6 square facets, forming a combined geometric structure of those facets, of those traits, intellect and imagination. Okay? And as spoken before, self-awareness itself, the cube octahedron, is formed by square-based. Now, those square external facets become the bases of square-based pyramids. The equilateral triangles become the bases of tetrahedron pyramids, but all directed inwards to a common vortex center, an agreement, forming an agreement, and that agreement is awareness. Emotional awareness forms center point hexagon equatorial planes, 4 of them. It also forms 3 equatorial emotional square planes of intellect. Emotional intelligence forms an agreement of emotional intelligence. But like I said, those square-based pyramids of attitude and the equilateral triangle-based pyramids, but we say base, but all of the facets of a tetrahedron pyramid are all equilateral triangles, all directed inwards. Now, if you take a pyramid, created a geometric sphere, and those pyramids are directed outwards, it's an expression of those pyramids. If you direct them inwards, it's an impression of those pyramids. Now, all pyramids represent forms of sense. Labels, recognizes and recalls memory. Sense. Sense visualizes thoughts into the dream state. Visualizes thoughts. So the cube octahedron is impressed by attitude and impressed by common sense. A tetrahedron pyramid represents common sense, forming emotional awareness, agreements. Awareness is a love-based sense agreement. You put a center point in the middle of a hexagon, connect the center point to all of the external points, it creates 6 equilateral triangles. It forms a planar sense. Planar sense, a sensory impulse. Sensory impulse. Visualization of unconditional acceptance, conclusive agreement of focused imagination, love-based sense agreement, its awareness, sensory impulse. Okay, self-awareness. Self-awareness. Impressed by attitude and common sense. Now, when we take multiples of those cube octahedrons, all rotated around that common agreement point, the vortex agreement within the center of the cube octahedron, creating a larger geometric sphere, we can create personality by doing that. If we take 5 cube octahedrons and the square forming polarized structures, so the top and bottom square planes of the cube octahedron, you add 4 more cube octahedrons to that, all rotating around that one common planar top and bottom facets to form 5 squares overlapping to form 20 points of an icosagon, top and bottom planes, polar planes, a polar structure. Then you take the emotional intellect planes of all those cube octahedrons to become bases of externally expressed square-based pyramids of attitude, it will form personality, a product of identified attitudinal behavior, a product of identified nature, personality, identity-based nature. So you grow personality as products of self-awareness, not as products of will. Not as products of will, of self-awareness. Self-awareness, understanding the self, wanting to understand the self, wanting to understand the self, taking on board impressions of attitude and common sense, expressing those agreements of emotional intelligence into nature, self-awareness-based nature. That's what it becomes, self-awareness-based nature. Self-awareness-based nature forms self-control. Self-control. Self-control is moral-based. It's a moral-based expression of attitude, but self-awareness-based. Those products, those attitudinal expressions of self-awareness form emotional octagon planes of morality, two overlapping squares, representing two overlapping square-based pyramids expressed externally. Self-control. So that structure of personality is a product of self-control. Self-controlled personalities. Self-controlled identity-based attitudinal behaviors. Self-controlled. Moral-based. Morality gives that self-control. Morality is a product of experience-based intelligence. In essence, morality is experiential judgment. You form judgments of what is the best way to act or behave if you want to achieve a certain goal. The best way to achieve that through experiential learning. Learning what is the best way to achieve a particular goal. It also works in social groups. What is the best behavior within a social group so as not to cause conflict? Moral-based behavior is virtue. Moral-based attitudinal behavior, moral-based nature is virtue. Virtuous nature, virtuous attitudinal behavior. So self-control, when you have those attitudinal expressions of the emotional intellect agreement, the emotional logic of self-awareness, it forms virtue. Moral-based attitudinal behavior, self-control. And like I said, you get a few of those all combining to create a larger geometric structure of personality. So personality becomes self-controlled personality. All self-controlled personalities of the mind. Self-controlled. Moral-based. Moral-based self-control. I don't know whether that's been attempted before, or whether that's where we're heading now, or whether we're heading there again because it failed at some other point in time. This is all the stuff that I'm bringing in from memory, as in my research, Alchemira, ALKAMIRR, Advanced Life Kinetics and Memory Intuited Regenerative Research. Regenerative to recreate something, to create it again. Memory intuited, to remember. That's what that means, to remember what we are, how we created everything through our own thoughts. To remember how we created everything, to remember that this is our dream. This is our dream. We visualized our thoughts and embedded ourselves into our own dream state to experience the visualizations of our own thoughts. Fascinates me. So like I said, we can still have personalities, identified attitudinal behaviors, which are consciousness. The pentagon represents motive, personal thought, or consciousness. So we can still have personal thought. Identity. Motive-based intelligence. Intelligent motivation. Identity. Okay. So like I said, whether that has been attempted before, because all of the attempts of Christ consciousness, all were failures, because they were still dominated by will. Will is very dominating. And a lot of people probably say, but we want will. That's what free will is. Why can't we still have will? Okay, because it's just too dominant. Their desires become too powerful, too important. Everything else just didn't matter anymore. This is what we have. This is the result of that. It's just the result of that total chaos. So if we have self-awareness based consciousness, if our planetary consciousness was formed by cube octahedrons of self-awareness, the energy grid of the planet, the language of thought, the state of mind of our planet, our dream state, was formed by self-awareness, awareness of the self, awareness of what we are, how we came about, everything that we've really wanted to know, awareness of the self. So we can have that. I've been attempting, I actually drew up a planetary grid based on self-awareness instead of the will-based system, which was the Becker-Hagen grid system. The Becker-Hagen grid system. Planetary grid. It was all will-based. Will dominant. Our poles rotated around the axis of will. But in this case, in this grid system, our poles will rotate around the axis of self-awareness, the points of the cube octahedron of self-awareness, forming self-control. Intellectual, emotional intellect agreements, attitudinally expressed. Nature agreements. That's what forms in that structure, nature agreements. Intellect polarized nature agreements. In the case of the personality-based structure, it forms evolvability polarized nature agreements, the ability to evolve our conscious state through self-awareness. Personality-based evolvability, the ability to evolve our conscious state through self-awareness, not desire. Desire is just a disaster waiting to happen. Same as competition, disaster waiting to happen. So we need to get away from all the basic foundations of our entire existence must change. Christ's will was still had will in the foundations, even though it was regulated or tried to be regulated by nature. Nature tried to regulate will. Will was too strong. Will is too strong. So the foundations have to change. You can't create something better by keeping the same foundations that created the mess that we had before. It's an impossibility. You just can't do it. The foundations have to change. So self-awareness has become more important than will. Self-awareness must become more important than will, more important than desire, trying to visualize all of our personal agendas, not giving a stuff about anybody else. Self-awareness. No, we can have it. We can have identified self-awareness, identified attitudinal behavior, identity-based attitudinal behavior, but a product of self-awareness. Will in that system is redundant. We've had enough time now, enough changes or attempts to change the dream state, to get rid of violence, competition, hierarchical privilege and dominance, all of the crappy stuff. We've attempted that so many times. We always kept the same foundations. We tried to still have self-awareness. Compassion is a product of motive-regulated self-awareness, but it's still will-based. Still will-based. Still a product of desire, therefore governed by desire, governed by our personal agendas, our visualizations, our conscious visualizations. Just failures. Total failures. Like I said, we can't have that. It just doesn't work. Just doesn't work. However, now, with that identity polarized nature agreement that actually forms personality, an attitudinal expression of identified self-awareness, identity-based self-awareness, it still can create a mind state of logic states, a mind state formed by logic states. It can still have belief logic. It can still have belief logic, but it's all a product of self-awareness. Now, if you take a decagon prism, all square sides of the prism, the top and bottom facets, the polar facets, are decagons, 10-pointed polygons. If you put a center point in the top decagon and the bottom decagon, now the decagon is a product of two overlapping pentagons of motive, personal thought, or consciousness. The decagon represents belief, product of experience-based consciousness. So those two pentagon-based pyramids of the polar decagons, if you take those pentagons as bases of pentagon-based pyramids, so those bases connect to the upper center point of that decagon polar plane, it creates experience-based or interactive overlapping pentagon-based pyramids of desire. So belief logic, the agreements of belief logic becomes an experience-based agreement of desire. An agreement of desire. But belief-based, belief-polarized agreement of desire. So we still have desire, but we don't have will. Apparently, because will is that pure expression of desire. There's no other traits or facets in that icosahedron but creativity and motive. Motive-based creativity. All personal agenda-based. Pure expression. It's too powerful. You can't regulate it. It's too powerful. So when regulated by self-awareness, and like I said, I don't know whether this has been done before as Christ consciousness with Jesus and Buddha and all those other characters. I don't know whether it was done before. But I don't think it has been. To me, this is a new way of thinking outside the box. We change the whole foundations of our reality. The whole foundations of our reality have to change to actually make this work. Like I said, we create a whole new energy grid. Thought is energy. So it's just a visualization of thoughts. An energy grid, thought grid, designs of thought, language of thought. Planetary consciousness becomes self-awareness based. Awareness of the self. Awareness of the self. An attitudinal expression of self-awareness. Nature agreements. Attitudinal expressions of self-awareness. Not all of them. You can have nature agreements that aren't products of self-awareness. But with self-control is an attitudinal expression of self-awareness. Okay. So, that's what I wanted to talk about. The possibility of where we're headed. Changing the whole foundations of our reality itself. So that self-awareness is more important than will or desire. And then building upon those foundations to create a new reality of self-awareness. Learning more about ourselves, about what our potential is, sharing that potential with one another. The shared dream becomes a dream of common decency, caring and sharing. Not everybody run around like chooks with their heads cut off, trying to figure out how to create their personal agendas. Okay, now that might have been a little bit confusing, that explanation. I apologise if it was. I have created that grid, worked all out, all of the grid system of the planet. Initially, I tried to use Christ will to create that grid, and I formed a grid of eternal consideration, but it was still will-based. Still will-based. So, like I said, it still would have been a failure. So, like I said, self-awareness, awareness of the self, impressed by attitude and common sense to form emotional awareness, sensory impulse, sensory reflex response, a sensory program essentially. sensory programs, programmed by attitude and common sense. Self-awareness is a product of sensory programs programmed by attitude and common sense. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. I get carried away and I look at the time and go, good grief. So I hope someone got something from it, and we'll catch up.